Hello and welcome to the 25th installment of Kalam Digest. That's Kalam Podcast Weekly News Summary. Today is the 18th of March, 2025. Sam Karlshamre, my esteemed colleague, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Edgar.
Today, in a terrifying turn of events, the war on Gaza is back on after Israel conducted overnight surprise airstrikes, killing more than 320 people, many women and children. Uh, the airstrikes were conducted in the middle of the night, sort of 4 a.m. in the morning, 4 a.m. in the morning, Gaza time. That's when many people were at home, not celebrating, but eating the suhoor meal. It's the holy month of Ramadan right now, and before the sun goes up, many families wake up extra early to eat the suhoor meal before sunrise in order to fast all day. This is, of course, maybe the worst thing that could happen, and yet predictable. Sam, what are your initial thoughts?
I think you summarized it pretty well. It's the worst thing that could happen, and it's also quite predictable. We've been waiting for this for a couple of weeks now, actually, since Israel started claiming that Hamas had, not broken the ceasefire, because obviously they haven't, but claiming that Hamas was kind of obstructing the ceasefire negotiations. There's been this very complicated back and forth discussions about moving from phase one to phase two and what are the requirements for that, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, there are no, circumstances under which the ceasefire was supposed to be just broken with, massive terror bombings of civilians in this way. But since that talk started coming out of the Israeli camp a couple of weeks ago, I've been kind of waiting for this to happen. Also, Smotrich, the most extreme right-wing person, perhaps, in the current Israeli government, out of all the extreme right-wing people running it.
And
Uh,
the finance minister, to be
the
clear.
finance minister, yes, is a finance minister, but he's also kind of a representative of the extreme, explicitly, let's say, ethno-fascist wing of the current Israeli government, has been demanding a return to war on Gaza, and he has been kind of celebrating since this news came out, and it's been clear, I think, from several sources inside, well-placed sources inside the Israeli administration, that this has been planned for at least a week now. So yeah, it comes as no surprise in a way, but still, of course, until it starts, you hope that it doesn't have to come to this, but
Here we are.
perhaps the extent of the bombings is what surprises me. I mean, I was sure that they were going to start bombing more systematically again at some point, especially with the new American government being, all out behind any kind of terror campaigns. But, the latest number I heard was 350 people killed, and it seems to be rising every minute. That's a lot of people in just one, overnight
Yeah.
bombing.
I remember I was just about to go to bed last night, and I saw the news and sort of stayed up all night watching it in shock and sort of terror. And I saw a scene. I was watching Al Jazeera, and it was a horse and carriage essentially doing the job of an ambulance, and
Yeah.
there was a bunch of people on just like a not a carriage at all, just a bunch of wooden planks that were connected to a horse that was driving it, and there were injured people on there, and so this horse was taking these injured people to the hospital, and it ran into an obstacle, and everyone fell off. I mean, it was just such, scenes of such deprivation.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe. Yeah, you mentioned Smotrich, very much not a friend of Kalam podcast. Although we do have,
High on the list of non-friends of the pod, I would say.
yeah,
Top three.
yeah, top three, definitely. Friend of the show though, Tala Herzallah, the 22-year-old student from Gaza who we've been hearing from Over the course of this show, she was kind enough to send us a voice note to share her initial thoughts.
Just this morning, actually.
Yeah, so let's take a listen to that.
Alhamdulillah, we're good. I think you can hear the drone above us. The last night was, I can't say it was a nightmare. It was worse than that, way worse than that. It was like I woke up with these loud voices of explosions and bombs, and I looked at my mom. I asked her one question: is that real? Tell me it's not. Tell me I was dreaming, I was having a nightmare. It's not real. And then I saw things around us turning red. I was in a case of unbelieving. It's not fair to return. I was just trying to live my life, to return my life. I was trying to work and to complete my studies. And is it real that I'm again returning to the same circle of killing, of death, of blood, of bombing, of rubble? I don't know. It was a case of unbelieving. And then I spent the whole night just wondering what's next. Is it real that we want to relive what we lived in the war in the last 1 year and a half? It's real that we have to pack our bags because at any time we have to evacuate and leave the place. Many question marks.
That was 22-year-old Gazan student Tala Herzallah, who recently returned to her hometown of Gaza City after having been displaced in the south. You can hear the terror in her voice and what she's saying, and you can also hear, which she mentions, the intense sound of the drone overhead, that like sound in the background. That's the sound that has been haunting Gaza for the past 16, 17 months. It, during this short-lived ceasefire that took effect in January, that sound left a little bit, at least parts of Gaza. It's definitely all the way back now. Sam, what are your reactions to what she said?
I mean, it's hard to comment. It speaks for itself, actually. I mean, it's you can hear the terror and the fright and the sadness in her voice, and I mean, it's I don't know what to say, actually. You can imagine, as she says, it's like we're between death and death. I think that's very aptly put. It's like
Yeah.
they've been knowing that this might happen, of course, but still the hope is always there that, this time we might be moving towards a permanent ceasefire or even a peace of some kind. But I mean, of course, going back to the 16 months of all out killing, and I mean, as you mentioned, also, I mean, she's been fleeing around, moving around the Gaza Strip to get away from the worst, most intense attacks. And now, they finally, after weeks, they've decided to return to their homes, perhaps to start rebuilding. And now, immediately what happens is the war just starts up again. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's deeply
Yeah, no words is an apt description of what's happening. I can read some reactions worldwide. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says that he is shocked by the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza and is calling for the ceasefire to be respected. Families of hostages are calling for a protest outside Israel's parliament. There was an ongoing Israeli sort of protest movement against Netanyahu in the past few days. It's going to be crucial, I think, for that to be maintained now, although it's more difficult when a war is on to maintain such a protest movement. Sam, could you tell us a little bit about the domestic situation in Israel politically and sort of what Netanyahu's personal politics have to do with the resumption of hostilities?
Yes, well, the personal politics is you know, perhaps I'm the only one old enough, but perhaps some of our listeners remember the movie Wag the Dog from the 90s about like how US basically starts wars to save the president's
Yeah.
ass. That was kind of a joke at the time, but this is literally true in the case of Netanyahu, as I think we mentioned many times before. But he is being indicted for very, very serious corruption and fraud, and very, very serious charges directly connected to his position as prime minister. And these proceedings started up again after being on hold for the duration of the genocide and the war. They started up again Monday, yesterday. And today he was supposed to be, make a statement in court. And suddenly the war starts again, meaning that the proceedings are now halted again. So basically, we're in a situation where Netanyahu himself can, start his own trial at will by starting a war. Um, it's in so many ways this is fucked up in so many levels. It's not just for the Palestinian sake. It also shows how Israeli society, how can it actually survive this as
Yeah.
even the kind of the figment or the pretense of democracy for Jewish citizens of the state, that it's had up until recently. Will that hold? It's been an apartheid state for decades in terms of its as a state in general, but for Jewish people, Jewish citizens of Israel, it's been a democracy to some extent, and that is clearly falling apart now. It's blatantly corrupt at the top levels, and everyone knows this. Everyone sees this happening. This trial has been well publicized, of course, in Israel, and
Yeah.
everyone sees that he was supposed to appear in court today, and overnight bombing starts, and so I mean that's one thing. That's his personal politics. But if you talk about the more kind of broader domestic politics of Israel, I would say, I mean, people see this. People have to notice this. And during the war and the genocide up until now, he's been extremely popular. His popularity ratings have gone up, and the government has been strengthened again after dropping drastically on the 7th of October, of course. So I mean, a couple of weeks ago, it seemed that Netanyahu would win a re-election if there was a new election. But I mean, this will be polarizing in a new way.
Mm.
I mean, that's what you have to expect because, you have basically 90% of the Israeli Jewish population gets behind the government in times of any war,
Yeah.
and very little actual peace protests, people demanding peace in general or any kind of settlement, serious, even a serious two-state settlement with the Palestinians. But the level of, he's still not well liked by everyone. There's still kind of the idea that he is a corrupt politician, that he is kind of destroying or corrupting Israeli society from the inside. I mean, and to the extent that that message kind of takes over, I think he will have a hard time not having Israeli society kind of splitting 50-50, Israeli Jewish society then, of course.
Yeah. I think something else maybe worth mentioning. We're going to keep this episode short. There's not too much to say other than the actual update and how horrific and terrifying it is. We'll have to wait and see what the political ramifications of this will be across the region, in the US and Europe, of course. But something worth mentioning, I think, is the fact that these airstrikes come sort of just a day after, or even hours after, I believe a day after the U.S. struck Yemen, in a similar kind of very, very intense series of airstrikes. And the Trump administration, the peace candidate Trump, obviously, I guess he
Did anyone
called.
ever actually believe that? I
Yeah,
mean,
well, people did remember. We reported on you know, not just them, but a Muslim organization comes to
oh,
mind in Michigan that campaigned with him.
oh yeah, the imam of where was it? Somewhere around Dearborn, right?
Yeah, yeah,
December. He
exactly,
took me on stage, and I trust this guy.
exactly.
He told
You
me he
know,
would be nice to us, and
yeah, and he got the ceasefire, but that was clearly this has been short-lived. Unless this, yeah, well, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, the U.S. struck the Houthis in Yemen in a series of very, very intense airstrikes. The Biden administration did the same. Arguably, Saudi Arabia did the same with the same weapons. I mean, Saudi Arabia has U.S. weapons. They're the biggest buyer of U.S. weapons in the world. And the Houthis, nothing happened to them. So the Trump administration is trying the same tactic, but just more intense. And now Israel is sort of, it seems maybe in a way, piggybacking on those airstrikes to conduct their own airstrikes and just try to bomb their way out of this quagmire. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Like I said, we'll be updating you, our listeners, all week when it comes to this, and hopefully we'll be getting some good interviews from people inside of Gaza for you to hear. Sam, do you want to say something to close this off?
I think you're totally right. I think it's important to see that this is part of a general escalation from the kind of the Imperial West camp, with the US emboldening Israel. Not surprising, as we started out saying, but deeply, deeply distressing, of course. But I mean, as with the Houthis, of course, they're not going to be able to wipe them out with airstrikes. They have to put boots on the ground, and they won't do that. Same thing goes for Gaza. I mean, surely. I mean, this is one thing that I'm sure of. They've failed to achieve any of their military goals in 15 months of intense bombing and killing and massacring. They won't be able to achieve that in another couple of months. So it would just be more civilians dead and back to the same kind of status quo in a couple of months, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's close this off. Thank you so much, Sam Karlsheimer, for joining me today on this very tragic day, Tuesday, the 18th of March, 2025. We'll be returning to you shortly with more updates from Gaza, where the war is back on. Have a good day, Sam.
You too. Bye.